Welcome back, everybody. This is the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage, making a video for you guys today because I have the opportunity. A lot of times I get ideas for videos, or maybe you guys have ideas for videos you'd like to see, but I don't have the machine in front of me, or I don't have the particular situation where I can show it, and I had it today, and I wanted to show this to you guys. This, of course, is the BT type motor that was used by Singer for decades. They made some changes and updates to it over the years. But I wanted to show this to you because I'm going to be servicing the grease wicks. Now this particular motor, this is not true of all Singer motors, but it is true of both the potted motors as well as a number of motors such as this that Singer had in production. You will also find these on Singer featherweights, although the motor is different, but you still have grease wicks that need to be serviced. Now, it's really important to know some sewing machines, some sewing machine motors don't take grease for their bearings, and some of them don't have bearings. They have what's called a bushing, which is basically a fancy way of saying they have like a sleeve or a collar that covers the shaft that spins, and they need lubrication as well. Those motors require, and I've shown this in other videos, 1 drop of sewing machine oil, but that's a different motor setup. You see a lot of those motors in the 50s and 60s, okay? And I've done videos on how to find that because you want to be very cautious and careful before you put anything in a motor because you want to know what the motor needs and what it doesn't need, okay? Some motors have lots of openings and holes. So if you were looking at this motor, for example, you'll notice that, let's get my little pointer here, there's a hole here, or there's a gap here, there are holes here. This could be for airflow, I don't know. But if you didn't know, you know, there are people who will go up to a motor and it's like, oh, there's a hole there, it must need oiling, and they'll squirt oil in it. And you can destroy the motor, and it's a really bad thing to try to do unless you know for sure what it needs. This particular motor design uses a grease, okay? It uses Singer lubricant. I've got a little syringe here, I've got it put in. And it takes not just any grease, you have to be very specific, because if you don't use the right grease, it won't work because the heat of the motor impacts the way the grease softens. If you use a grease that's too thin, the grease will melt into an oil and destroy the motor. If you use grease that's too thick, it won't flow and it won't provide lubrication. So as I've mentioned many times, sewing machines can be very specific in what they like and what they most definitely do not. But back to the topic at hand here. So I'm zooming in here so you guys can see. Hopefully this will pick up for you. I'm going to tilt the camera a little bit here. So what are you seeing? One of the things that will tell you if a sewing machine uses grease, other than the research that you would be doing online, is you're going to see this is like a little silver pipe, okay? And this is, for lack of a better word, a port, if you will, where grease is applied. Now the way this is designed is this piece, inside of this piece, there's an opening here, and then there's an opening in the bottom, okay? It looks like a little tube, basically. And inside that tube is a wick, okay? And this here is the 1/8 inch size wick that I have. And anyway, we're going to go in and I'm going to replace the wick. Now this motor has this on both sides, okay? So I've got to do both. I've got to do this side and this over here. And I'm going to do, it's easier to show and see the side on my right here. But just to mention to you guys, when you're getting ready to do both, okay, you have to loosen the bolt here on the side bracket to get the belt off, and you may decide to take the whole motor off. It might be easier for you. But anyway, the belt here is in the way, and we definitely don't want to have to struggle with it to do this side. But this side here is does not have the cap that the other side does. So you'll notice I got a really small set of needle nose pliers, but you can still get access to it, okay? But I'm not going to do both. I'm just going to show you guys one of them because they're done the same. So let's turn back around, and we have, here's again, our little grease port. Now, this is important. Sometimes these things will come out and sometimes they will fight you. Remember, some of them have never been removed. This poor motor has been using probably the same wick since it came out of the factory. That's very likely. Although it shouldn't. It should have had regular service, but over the years the idea of servicing went away. The service opportunities from Singer went away. But the first thing you want to do is, the first thing you do not want to do is to twist this. This is not threaded like a screw or bolt. And if you twist it, you will actually make it harder for yourself to get it out. Point number two, these are made of very soft metal. It may even be aluminum. So you can't go in here and just strong arm it, because you'll crush it and you'll ruin it, and that will not be fun either. Because you want the grease to flow in the wick, right? This is just a housing for it. So what I'm doing is that, the needle nose pliers have some grip to them. And what I'm going to do, turn this, because I'm behind you guys, behind the camera here. Okay, so let's see if this is, make sure everything's getting into focus here for you all. Okay, now I'm going to take the plier and I'm just going to grab it here, okay? And I want to hold the pliers to it, but again, don't crush it because you could literally destroy it. And what you want to do is get a grip on this little wick holder, and you're going to pull up. You only want to pull up. Do not twist it from side to side. It will make it more difficult to remove, and that'll make sense as soon as I get this out. So I'm going to, pulling, okay, just keep trying, and just keep, and again, if it doesn't, sometimes it won't come. You'll sit there and it's like, well, I'm trying, I don't want to damage it, and it's not coming out. That's when you may want to get a hairdryer, apply a little bit of heat. Always, as I always say, guys, be very, very conservative with the heat, because you don't want to damage it. You just want to get enough warmth in here to soften what is probably old oil or grease that's acting like a cement. The other thing you obviously want to do is to unplug. If you have a machine, make sure it's unplugged. This one doesn't have, I'm going to have to get a new, I've got a new cord for this, so nothing's plugged into this machine. Never have it plugged in. I know that sounds almost silly, so of course you wouldn't do that. People can be forgetful, okay? There's certain things in life you want to just be reminded over again and again. You don't want to, have a moment of lapse and be working on something electrical when it's plugged in. Okay, so I'm going to grab hold of this again, and I'm going to try, and okay, I can see it. Boom, and there she comes. Now, I'm going to bring this up close so you guys can see, and if you look, this little port holder, the wick holder, notice it has grooves in it, but it's not threaded like a screw. These grooves are actually designed, I'm going to have to turn this because the light on the camera is doing it. There we go. These grooves are designed to hold it in place because the hole is in the plastic of the motor housing. Underneath this hole down in here, the drive shaft of the motor is surrounded by a bearing or a bushing. I'm not sure, to be honest. But whatever it is, it requires grease. So, now if you try pulling the wick out of this, the wicks, they're usually felt, right? Probably felted wool originally. And when you pull, a lot of times they'll simply come apart, right? They can, and then you're like, oh no. It's not that big of a deal though. If you come from the top side, okay, you can take something that's, more narrow than the hole and simply push, and out it comes. And you can see, if I put that down, you'll see that there's the wick, right? And a little part of it has come off, so I'm going to cut a new piece of wick to make it just a tad bit longer than this. If you can get the whole wick out as it was originally sized, that's about the right size. You might add just like a 30-second extra, just because of maybe it shrank, maybe it wore a little bit. But this is not far off from what was originally in there. Now, the wicks often will look dark and dirty. That's just the changing, not so much dirt as it is old oil and grease or old grease rather, that's just gotten oxidized. And now this one has a little bit of pliability in it. Notice when I put it here, I can bend it. Sometimes they are so bad, they're like a piece of wood. They're so stiff that you imagine, how could any lubricant even flow through it? But it's an easy thing to access. This wasn't really that time consuming to do. So I'm going to take this is my replacement wick. This is 1/8 inch diameter. And I'm simply going to line up the old wick with the new. And I will take, let's see if I can cut it with the end of the pliers here. My scissors are someplace. And I'm just going to add just a little tiny bit more. And if you cut it too long and you go to put it in and it's too long, you can always trim it, right? It's easier to trim back than to try to expand something when you've cut it too short. So let's do that. There we go. And cut, oh, cut just fine. Okay, so now I've got my new wick. One of the things I'm going to do is I am going to just check and see. I don't know that my swab will even go down in there. Let's see if I can get one of my precision tips that I'm always talking about. Okay, I went and got my box. I use generic cotton swabs when I'm just doing basic cleaning, but when I need something that's more narrow and a little more precise, I use this. This is a special, excuse me, it's a specialty cotton swab. Who knew there was such a thing? And I've only seen it under the Q-tip brand. That's why I've got this one. And I've talked about these before. They're a little stronger. And anyway, I'm going to take my 99%, 95% alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and going to dip it here. And what I'm looking for, before I put the new wick in, I just want to make sure, I don't expect to get a lot out of this, but I want to make sure that there's nothing, old grease that can act as a glue to cause problems. There's a little bit of something there. Not really bad, but again, why not? You know, it's not hard to do, just to make sure. Be careful. You don't want to, that's why I'm using this precision tip, because I'm trying to make sure that I don't get any, you don't want any cotton fibers down in there. That's the last thing you want. Okay, not bad at all. But anyway, you got it checked there. Now, as I may have shown before, when you do the wicks for the potted motors on the direct drive Singers, I do this, and I'm going to do it here as well. I'm going to put grease, you know, when I reinsert this new wick into, what did I drop there? Into the wick holder, I'm going to have grease in there, but I want to be sure that I have a little bit of starter, what I call starter grease, right? So I'm going to put just a little bit here on the tip of the wick, the new wick, because remember the wick is dry, okay, and eventually it'll absorb, you know, the grease and do what it needs to do, but I just want to make sure that we're basically priming the wick, if you will, so that when the motor's turned on and you've got a new wick in there, it's ready to go, right? It is ready to go ahead and start providing lubrication, which really extends the life of the motor. That's why we do this. So we've got the end with the prime of grease, and now I'm going to take the wick and I'm going to put it back in. Actually, let's hold off just a minute because I forgot to show you a step here. I'm going to go ahead and add some grease to the wick holder. Now, obviously, if we pack it with grease, where's the wick going to go? This is kind of a situation where we're going to put in grease as best we can here. You see this, and I think there we go. And the little I got this syringe at a drugstore, by the way. It's just a syringe for, you know, like giving out cough medicine. There's no needle in it or anything. Now you can see my holder. Look, I've got grease all in the wick holder, and it's even shooting out the top there. Haha. Okay, now I've got my new wick. You think, well, gosh. So what am I going to do? I'm going to push the new wick in, okay? And some of that grease I put in is coming out, but at least I've got grease in there, right? I've got grease in the wick holder, and when I push the new wick in, it will stop, right? Because the opening on the bottom where you insert the wick is smaller, is bigger around than the opening in the top, right? The top is just there for the grease. So we've got grease in there surrounding the wick, and we're not done yet though, because now this is what the top looks like. And you might say, well, the wick's not really totally saturated with grease yet. And if you said that, you would be correct. It is not. So we've got a little trick here we're going to try, and that is, the grease is interesting. This grease is, you know, it has a melting point, And then as it cools, it kind of re-solidifies or gets semi-solid. It's not a total solid. So what are we going to do to help this work? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to find something made of metal, like the little piece of the lid on my alcohol jar here. I definitely want, this is going to be, like I say, it's dry and it's metal. So we'll put that there. Where are we? Ah, there we go. Okay, now what am I going to do? I'm going to get, you can, in this case, you can just get a hair dryer. Although a hair dryer may blow so much air that it may send this little thing rolling around. I can also get my heat gun because I'm experienced using the heat gun. Even on low, you have to be careful, guys, right? You're not cooking this thing, so be very respectful of heat guns. They can get a lot hotter than what you need, and too much is a very bad thing. Okay, so I've got the heat gun. I'm going to put it on low. Now, what am I doing? Well, I did what I just told you guys could happen. I'm going to have to hold this thing in place with I'll just hold it still with the pliers. It's not going to hurt the pliers. So what am I doing? I'm heating this up, and the purpose of that is, I can hold it still, I want to get it warm. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the grease that is in there, it's a small amount, but the grease that's in there will melt and get absorbed into the wick. Notice I'm going to hold the heat gun way back. We do not need a lot of heat here. You don't want a lot. And heat guns, this one can really pump out the heat, right? And it's not going to take much because the melting point of this grease is lower than it is for some other greases. People might say, oh, it's grease is grease, and that's not the case, okay? If you put lithium grease in here, it will not lubricate and will cause you a world of headaches. So please don't put lithium grease in here. That's not what you want. Ouch! Just that little bit got this thing really hot, okay? So we'll let that cool, and you'll start to see the grease shrinking because what's happening is it's melting and getting absorbed into the wick, okay? And then we can add a little bit more, and I'll show you how to do that. We're going to reinstall this. I'll put a little bit more on the edge. In fact, I can go ahead and pick this up with the pliers. I need the pliers anyway to reinstall it. That's really the best way. And remember, this little wick holder, guys, I think it's made of aluminum, okay? You can't be rough with it because it's a fairly thin metal. It's delicate as metal goes, so you want to be a little more gentle with it. Let's come back up to our motor here, okay? Now, I'm going to take and drop, pick up, and put back in my hands my little grease syringe here. Okay, so what am I doing now? You'll notice that we've got a little discoloration on the wick there. I'm going to put more grease on the priming end of this thing, okay? And I'm going to come up top. Well, I'll do that in a minute, actually. I won't do it yet. Now, I've reprimed the wick again. You say, geez, why do you have to keep doing this? Because we wanted some of that grease that we initially put in to get absorbed into the wick. So now, I'm going to simply reinsert the wick holder, okay? And that extra wick will be fine because it's going to come up into the wick holder. Now, it's not fully in, and this is where you want to also be gentle, okay? Don't be rough with this. I've got, like for example, right here, I've got the handle of my pliers, which is rubberized, and I can even use like I can even use maybe a piece of plastic, something that's not going to be too harsh on this piece. And then I can take, I think I've got a larger screwdriver here. I'm not even using a metal hammer. And I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to very lightly, let's pan back a bit. You guys won't be able to see what I'm doing here. I'm going to move the camera so you guys can see. Okay, I'm going to tap this just very gently, and watch at the base, and you should see it going in. Even have to adjust this a bit. Okay, and that's it. If you can almost not see those little grooves in the base, or maybe just the very top where I can see, that's good. She's good to go. Now, one last thing. you think, well, does it have enough grease in it? Because this thing is really small, guys. It doesn't hold that much. So I'm going to do what I call topping off. Now, if you do this with an old wick, you can do it, but you don't know how well the old wick is going to allow lubrication to flow because it's got a lot of old dried up stuff. Now, you'll notice it looks like I just put frosting on top of something there. Now, what am I going to do? I've just got this grease sitting here. The grease sitting there is, eventually the motor will get warm, and hopefully, if the machine's used enough, the grease will trickle down. But we can accelerate that just a bit. And again, be very gentle. Notice where I'm holding the heat gun, guys. Do not do this. You could really damage the motor. I'm going to come away. I've got it on low, by the way. Now watch the grease. Okay, some of it's melting, and you want to come back because a little bit of it dribbled on the outside of the grease holder, and we don't want that on the side of the motor. But look up here. It melted, and it's starting to trickle down into the wick. And that is how you prime and refill a grease wick. And don't be dissuaded if you think, well, gosh, I could barely get any grease in there. This doesn't hold much. Most of what's in this grease holder, most of what is in this wick holder is the wick. It takes up a good bit. And so we're basically priming the wick. We're getting it warm to get some of that priming grease to go into the wick so it'll soak it up. We're accelerating something that would happen over time, but you want to be able to start using this and feel confident that your machine is properly lubricated, or your motor is properly lubricated. I'm just going to come over. If any of that, this is why you saw I didn't put a lot, because if you put a big old blob of grease here, some of it's going to start running all over the place. That's the last thing you want. Notice I barely put just a tiny little dab up top. I mean, we're talking about a small amount. And so now the grease went down, and I can maybe I'll try one more little tiny blob. I mean, it's just a little bit here. And eventually it won't flow anymore because you'll know because you'll have topped it off. And when that happens, just stop right there, okay? And you're not going to have to keep doing this with any kind of heat source, because eventually, here, watch, let me zoom in and you guys can see what it does. Okay, watch what happens. Okay, you'll see it, and some of it's dribbling down into the wick, but a little bit of it did still come on the outside of the wick holder. So again, this is why be very judicious, very conservative. Don't go putting a bunch of grease in here, guys, because you're going to end up with a melted grease mess. Okay? Now, you might think, well, is the grease too thin? No, it's warm and it's soaking into the wick. It will eventually get thicker as it cools, and you think, well, how's it going to flow? Well, the heat from here on out is not going to come from you having to play with hair dryers or heat guns. That would really be a pain. Because the motors generate their own heat, okay? And they cool themselves by convection, and many of them have a fan inside. But as they get warm, the grease will soften just enough, not too much, that it will flow from the wick to the bearing as it is needed. So think of your wick as kind of a lubrication tank, okay? And it just dispenses enough based on warmth, and that is why and I'm going to work on making a video just about grease, because I get a lot of questions about this. What kind of grease to use? What can I find? You really want to think about that before you do it. Now that this has been done, like I say, the other side, I'll take care of the other side, and the machine will have new wicks, very little expense, and the grease, look at the tiny amount it took, right? So that's really all that's left. Make sure, inspect your motor, make sure you did not dribble or leak or melt any grease that's dripping, God forbid, inside the motor. That is a horrible thing to do. Do not do that. Okay, you got to be real specific with this. It's not hard, but people sometimes go crazy and they think if a little's good, more is better. That is not true. More is not better when it comes to this, okay? And anyway, all that's left now, and you'll see this little cutout here, is designed to make room for the grease port. By the way, you'll want this, I may wait, before I put this back in, let's make sure this is cooled, because things get warmed really quickly with a heat gun or even a hair dryer. So anyway, you can also use this technique on Singer featherweight motors or any other sewing motor that has a grease port and a wick. If you see a wick, it should be taking grease, okay? Some machines have wicks for oil, so it just depends on the brand and the model. So you never want to make assumptions. If you're going to do this, go and investigate. You can look at videos like this, and other people have them online as well. But take your time. Don't be in a hurry, because if you put oil in here or you put the wrong grease, you can really cause the motor harm, and that's a shame, because I believe this motor, we'll see. I'll be plugging it in, and when you guys see the debut, and we'll be listening to it and testing it. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I think I may have talked about grease wicks and ports before on another model. I think it was a Kenmore or something, or white. But I wanted to show this to you because a lot of the older Singer motors had places to insert grease, and it was really important. So thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.